G'day folks, Sapper here with another World of Warships video. Welcome to In Depth, the series with theory crafting and analysis where we see how deep rabbit holes can get. Before we get started, if this is your first Commonwealth video of mine, I suggest you go check out my Commonwealth Tech Tree Overview video, link is down in the comments section. In this video I am going to go over in detail my proposed Commonwealth Cruiser line. First up, some caveats. Commonwealth for the purposes of this video includes all the nations that were a member of the Commonwealth at that time, including countries such as India, Pakistan, Malaysia, Singapore and South Africa. A lot of ships will share similarities with Royal Navy ships. That's fine. Perth isn't the same as Leander, and a lot of the difference between ships comes down to things that wargaming arbitrarily define or tweak, such as reload, shell characteristics, torpedo arcs, concealment or consumables. I always attempt to include ship classes that a spread of Commonwealth nations operated, however I prioritise the progression of the line from a gameplay perspective first and foremost. I envisage the cruiser line to lean on consumable elements from Hayter and Perth, but leave Perth with enough going on for her to still be special. She's suffered enough nerfs and power creep over the years as it is, most of those relating to smoke firing and spotting with spotter plane. The guiding principle for this line is a line of light cruisers that sits somewhere outside the Royal Navy and the United States Navy lines, with a bit more of an ability to function in open water and at range. The Commonwealth Cruiser line will invariably be compared to Royal Navy. That's fine, and I will use that as a point of reference in some sections. Commonwealth nations often operated old ships for a longer period of time, particularly cruisers, and upgraded them to keep them current. The Commonwealth Cruiser line reflects this in areas, particularly at lower tiers. For my proposal, Commonwealth cruisers would have the following characteristics when compared to Royal Navy light cruisers. Access to HE shells, normalised AP, improved range, better shell ballistics and alpha damage, better citadel and armour schemes, less damage per minute, similar concealment, and no heal, except for the normal Tier 9 and Tier 10 cruiser heals. The consumable options would be as follows. Tier 4 and up, standard cruiser hydro. Tier 5 and up, Commonwealth cruiser creeping smoke. 90 second duration, 180 second cooldown. Tier 8 and up, radar as an option in the creeping smoke slot. Standard 10 km variant. Tier 9 and up, standard cruiser heal. All cruisers from Tier 4 would have access to depth charges and ASW capabilities, subject to how the implementation of submarines progresses. Similar to my Commonwealth destroyer proposal, the ships would trade DPM for better alpha damage, and in this case, access to HE. Because of better shell ballistics, shell arcs would be less floaty, and they would not be as safe behind islands compared to Royal Navy. Subsequently, greater range will be needed to allow them a degree of ability in open water settings for when creeping smoke isn't available. AP should be fairly normal for calibre, but not lose too much pen at longer ranges, similar to Perth. Often ships are more defined by their weaknesses rather than their strengths. So what are Commonwealth cruisers' primary weaknesses? Improved ballistics means island hugging is more risky. Even with an improved armour scheme, Commonwealth cruisers are still lightly armoured and have average hit points, and to top it off, no Royal Navy type heal options to compensate. And average speed. They will easily be kept spotted by an enemy destroyer if smoke or an allied destroyer isn't available. Putting it all together, Commonwealth cruisers would be arguably less fragile than their Royal Navy cousins, but without the ability to heal back damage, and be expected to function more in open water at times. While generally not long-ranged HE spammers, they would have respectable range for tier. Overall, their strength will lie in their versatility and range compared to the Royal Navy, while still primarily being defensive ships in nature. Their gameplay style will focus around mobile defense with intermittent open water gunnery. Creeping smoke use allows the cruiser to fire from relative safety, whereas the radar consumable would rely on the skill of the player, as to effectively engage that radar, the Commonwealth cruiser would expose themselves to possible enemy fire. The important balancing factors will be agility and range. As range for cruisers is an important metric, I will provide an approximate value for reference in this video. This range value would be subject to change based on balance considerations, so please don't get too stuck on it as it's just a reference point. It was difficult sorting the premiums from the tech tree ships for names, so in many places I went with the class name for the ship, so that many distinguished ships may be added later as premiums. Wargaming can worry about the names should they implement some sort of Commonwealth Cruiser line in future. On to the ships. Tier 1, Indus. Indus is a Grimsby-class sloop of the Royal Indian Navy, launched in 1934. She was a slightly enlarged version when compared to other Grimsbys. Grimsby-class sloops were operated by Australia and New Zealand Station. Australia operated Yarra, Swan, Parramatta and Warrego, and Royal Navy ships Leith and Wellington served New Zealand Station. Indus has the following specs: 2 single 120mm guns, 9.5km range, 19 knot speed. Indus would function much like a hybrid between Black Swan and Hashidate, sharing similarities with both. Otherwise, she's a fairly typical Tier 1. Tier 2, Pelorus. Pioneer and Psyche are Pelorus-class protected cruisers that served with Australia during World War I. Pioneer was involved in the capture of 2 German merchant ships and the East Africa campaign. Psyche was involved in operations in the Pacific, particularly in Southeast Asia. Despite being obsolete and decrepit, Pioneer saw more actual combat than any other Australian ship in the First World War. Both ships were decommissioned around the end of World War I. Pelorus has the following specs: 8 single 102mm guns, 11km range, 22 knot speed. Pelorus is a pretty typical Tier 2, albeit a little slower than many. She is smaller than many other Tier 2 ships, which could be seen as an advantage. Tier 3, Challenger. Challenger and Encounter are Challenger-class protected cruisers that served with Australia during World War I. Encounter was notable for being the first Royal Australian Navy ship to ever fire an anger during the course of occupying German New Guinea. She spent much of the First World War conducting escort duties before eventually being decommissioned in 1929. Challenger has the following specs: 11 single 152mm guns, 12km range, 24 knot speed. Challenger is typical of Tier 3 protected cruisers and does not differ from others at Tier 3 in any notable ways. For the Commonwealth, she's notable in the cruiser line for being the first ship armed with 152mm guns. Tier 4, Chaitham. Chatham-class cruisers, and more widely Town class, saw service with Australia and New Zealand. Chatham saw service with New Zealand, and Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Adelaide saw service with Australia. Chatham has the following specs: 8 single 152mm guns, 13km range, 2 single 533mm torpedoes, 26 knot speed, hydro, and depth charges. Chatham begins the Commonwealth Cruisers' transition from the old protected cruisers of the pre-war era towards more modern Second World War light cruisers. Some reports state that the various ships of the class travelled up to 28 knots, however 26 knots was far more commonly listed. Some ships were fitted with ASW later in life, and to reflect this, she is the first cruiser of the line to be equipped with hydro and depth charges. Tier 5, Dunedin. Dunedin and Diomede were Danae-class cruisers that served with the New Zealand Division of the Royal Navy. Both provided assistance to the town of Napier in New Zealand in 1931 after Napier was levelled by the Hawke's Bay earthquake. Dunedin has the following specs: 6 single 152mm guns, 14km range, 4 triple 533mm torpedoes, 29 knot speed, creeping smoke, hydro, and depth charges. The Royal New Zealand Navy was not formed until 1941, and prior to that her functions were fulfilled by the New Zealand Division of the Royal Navy. Dunedin and Diomede were prominent members of the New Zealand Division. Dunedin is notable for being the first ship of the line to be equipped with creeping smoke. She is also notable for having 12 torpedo tubes, 6 each side, and 14km range. While some may argue that she is an up-tiered Dane class, she has the tools to be very strong at Tier 5. Tier 6, Hobart. Hobart is a modified Leander class cruiser. Modified Leander class cruisers saw service with Australia, and Leander class saw service with New Zealand and India. Australia operated Perth, Hobart, and Sydney. New Zealand operated Leander and Achilles, and India operated Delhi, which was formerly Achilles. As Delhi was already announced as being in development for possible release, and Leander was already in use with Royal Navy, I selected a modified Leander as the tech tree Tier 6. Hobart has the following specs: 4 twin 152mm guns, 15 km range, 2 quadruple 533mm torpedoes, 33 knot speed, creeping smoke, hydro, and depth charges. Hobart is where the Commonwealth gameplay begins to differ substantially from Royal Navy light cruisers. Hobart has enhanced range over Leander or Perth. For my proposal, Hobart has enhanced alpha damage in exchange for longer reload, which provides another point of difference between her and Perth or Leander. This change in alpha or DPM should begin at Dunedin or Hobart, but no further down the line than Hobart. Tier 7, Bologna. New Zealand operated several Bologna-type Dido-class cruisers, Bologna, Royalist, and Black Prince. Pakistan operated Babur, formerly Diadem. Traditionally, Bologna-class cruisers were armed with 133mm guns. For the purposes of continuity, the tech tree version will be armed with 152mm guns. I have a premium Bologna-class cruiser in my wider proposal, so keep an eye out for my premium ships video for details. Bologna has the following specs: 4 twin 152mm guns, 16 km range, 2 triple 533mm torpedoes, 33 knot speed, creeping smoke, hydro, and depth charges. Bologna continues the Commonwealth progression with improved range and DPM over Hobart, while still maintaining a higher alpha strike, lower DPM trade-off compared to other light cruisers. Some adjustments may need to be made by Wargaming in the anti-air department, as the original 133mm guns were dual purpose. If Bologna does go ahead as a tech tree cruiser with 152s, there needs to be an appropriate New Zealand premium with 133s, as they have some interesting history. My choice was Black Prince. Please see my Commonwealth Premiums video when it comes out for details. Tier 8, Swiftshaw. Swiftshaw were a series of light cruisers built in the early 1940s. The lead ship was transferred to Canada and named Ontario. While in many respects Swiftshaw could be considered a modernised Fiji class, by tweaking some game-defined values, Swiftshaw can be effective at Tier 8. Swiftshaw has the following specs: 3 triple 152mm guns, 16.5 km range, 2 triple 533mm torpedoes, 33 knot speed, creeping smoke or radar, hydro, and depth charges. Swiftshaw continues the less is more flavour of Commonwealth cruisers, with 9 guns with good alpha damage and comparatively less DPM than other light cruisers. She is notable for her switch to an ABX configuration, with a majority of her firepower facing forwards. She is also notable for the option to equip radar consumable in the smoke slot. I have her range penciled in as 16.5 kilometers, which I feel is functional for a hit-and-run light cruiser at Tier 8. Tier 9, Tiger. Tiger class were the last built all-gun cruisers for the Royal Navy. Tiger class are a hypothetical procurement by Commonwealth nations in a traditional ABX turret configuration and with torpedoes seen in Swiftshaw. Had World War II continued, it is possible that older cruisers would have needed replacement with a modernised design like Tiger. Tiger has the following specs: 3 triple 152mm guns, 16.5 km range, 2 triple 533mm torpedoes, 34 knot speed, creeping smoke or radar, hydro, heel, and depth charges. Tiger would function like a slightly beefier Swiftshaw. Some Swiftshaws were converted during construction into Tiger class. Tiger is notable for being the first cruiser in the line with access to a heel. While not exactly distinctive compared to Swiftshaw, there is precedence in World of Warships for similar ship designs in succession. For example, Furitaka to Aoba, Mogami to Ibuki, and Fiji to Edinburgh. Tier 10, Bolerophon. Bolerophon is a ship based on the 1124 Alpha designs with some adjustments for the Commonwealth. The name is borrowed from a Swiftshaw class that was in limbo for refit and cancelled in 1946. Bolerophon has the following specs: 4 triple 152mm guns, 17km range, 2 quadruple 533mm torpedoes, 34 knot speed, creeping smoke or radar, hydro, heel, and depth charges. Bolerophon is notable for the increase in the number of guns. Her overall strength should be in line with the rest of the line and be emphasised when compared to Minotaur or Worcester. Bolerophon should be outclassed in DPM and island hugging, but outclassed both in open water and shooting at range. I would note that the 1124 Alpha design would need some changes to things like armour, water height, citadel layout to function better in game. The design itself resembles Royal Navy's Tier 9 Neptune in many regards, and I don't think a Tier 10 Neptune would be a fun ship or suit the rest of the line. However, I do think that the 4 triple 152mm guns should be a design factor in the Tier 10 for a good progression up the line. Bolerophon in essence would be much like some of the more theoretical ships in game, adjusted heavily for balance but keeping to the flavour of the line. In summary, the Commonwealth Cruiser line, while sharing some commonalities with Royal Navy, has enough options within the realms of the game to be different and have a unique feel. When balancing, care will need to be taken with range and agility. The ships need to be effective enough to function in open water situations, but without making them impossible to damage. The primary focus of a Commonwealth Cruiser captain should be situational applications of her guns when outside smoke, before ducking back into stealth. If survivability issues are found, some tweaks to armour and citadel layout, similar to US style light cruisers, could mitigate the issue. Tier 9 Tiger and Tier 10 Bolerophon are purely theoretical Commonwealth additions, and there are plenty of options in their positions thanks to that. I decided to keep the turrets as triples to keep a point of difference compared to Worcester or Minotaur. On my own feasibility calculations, with a 2500 HE Shell Alpha, the reloads would progress from around 9 seconds on Hobart to around 6 seconds on Bolerophon. This compares with other light cruisers as being between the middle and slowest in tier, depending on number of guns. Overall, while the Commonwealth Cruisers won't be winning any awards for durability or DPM, they should provide a fun experience for most players with a fairly easy playstyle that relies on smoke and a high skill cap with radar or open water work. Keep an eye out for my Commonwealth Premiums video, as some cruisers you think are missing or in configurations that aren't historical in the tech tree are in the tree as premium variants. A primary example is how Bologna has been equipped with 152s instead of 133s, whereas the premium Black Prince is equipped with the 133s. I think most people will be fairly happy with the overall spread. For an early iteration of the premiums I'm working on, check out my Commonwealth Tech Tree overview, link will be down in the description. Indus, Pelorus, Challenger, Chaitham, Dunedin, Hobart, Bologna, Swiftshaw, Tiger, Bolerophon. What do you think of them? I think they'll be a lot of fun with a lot of potential depending on the player. If you like them, or if you change something, tweak the idea, or have a different concept altogether, let me know down below. I'm open to any ideas. Either way, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you're interested in more Commonwealth proposal videos, check out my Tech Tree overview or my Commonwealth Destroyer line, both of which are already out. Next up for Commonwealth will be premiums, and depending on how changes are going to aircraft carriers and AA, I might do a Commonwealth aircraft carrier video at some point. Thanks for watching, stay sane, and I'll catch you in the next one.